That's great. Hi, Vinnie. It's great to be talking to you again. I'm really excited about the opportunity. From my perspective, today I really wanted to concentrate on the construction and engineering market. Really talk about beyond traditional ERP, so how things are changing and how things are different in terms of some of the trends, and I'll set some of those out. I'll talk about some of the challenges, but I'll also talk about why IFS is disrupting the market and how we're different to some of the other more traditional players. So my name is Chris Knight. I'm a Global Industry Director for Construction and Engineering. I've come to IFS really as a continuation of my career that started in construction many, many years ago, actually on the drawing board, would you believe, with pens. So even before CAD existed. I'm really showing my age telling you that, but hey, it was a great time. I joined a company called Ove Arab, who are a global engineering company, engineering consultancy. So it was a fantastic opportunity for me, and they helped me through college. I got a degree in construction management. So I stayed in construction. I worked for a couple of house building companies. And as part of that process, I think because of my age at that time, I found myself in a liaison role between the IT department and the business. So I understood construction, and I understood enough about the solutions that were trying to support the business and develop the business to be able to talk the languages and position myself in the middle, which is kind of still where I am to an extent. So I think I must have been doing something right.
Yeah.
I moved from providing solutions, or solution opportunities within construction, built relationships with those solution providers, and then maybe 20 years ago, I moved across and worked for a number of those, which is where I find myself today.
Well,
So
you know, I've been watching the screen as you've been talking. Construction become more modular, more automated. I'm looking forward to this because a lot of the other vendors just talk about construction from a project perspective, right?
Sure.
So much more in design, so much more in manufacturing, modular manufacturing, and so on. So looking forward to this, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinnie. Thank you. Yeah, I feel I've got a great opportunity in the role I'm in. I sometimes feel that I'm not doing the job I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm encouraged by my boss, to carry on doing what I'm doing, because when I'm researching things, I find it fascinating, as you say, the way the industry has changed and moved. I really enjoy the opportunity to be able to write and speak about that. So let me just dive in there and maybe talk a little bit just to start with about some of the markets, just to give a feel of what it is that we're talking about, potentially from a global perspective. So construction is big, very, very big, and it's changing rapidly, and there are a number of things that are happening that drive that, which I'll try and touch on as we work through the presentation. But hopefully you can see on the graphic that I've got here, that shift in emerging markets with China and US being clear leaders based on research by 2030, but also closely followed by India and Indonesia. And some of the reasons that's happening is to do with infrastructure. And when you think of what we've gone through over the last couple of years, maybe with COVID, governments are putting an awful lot of money into construction to try and stimulate their economies and grow their economies. So you'll see some of the major players, more familiar ones like the UK and Germany, starting to drop down as these big emerging economies start to really gather pace. So, as I said,
even in the Western world, we're seeing, the move to secondary and tertiary towns, and obviously a lot more redoing of infrastructure, right? So the Western markets aren't exactly dead either.
Absolutely. I was highlighting internally, actually, and also on LinkedIn, some of the incredible projects that are being undertaken, some of the big bridges that are joining, Asia across to the mainland, incredible structures. It really is interesting. And one of the numbers I've got on there, 58.3% of global GDP comes from construction. It's a phenomenal figure. But maybe thinking not just about the size of those markets, but how they're transitioning and changing. So the forecast, again, by 2030 is for construction to represent $14.2 trillion US. It's a huge amount of money. And currently, I think residential is the fastest growing sector. But as I said, infrastructure is going to overtake that soon. As I said, that's also driven by changes in relation to our living arrangements. As I said, the governments are trying to stimulate the economy. But again, on this graph, it starts to show specifically infrastructure construction. And you can see the amount of money being spent in India in particular is absolutely colossal amount of money. But maybe just to try and back that up in terms of what we're seeing in relation to some trends. So I'm going to pick out probably just 3 of the main trends that we're seeing that are driving and supporting some of that change in relation to what businesses are doing and what the economies are doing around that.
Right.
So thinking about off-site modular construction, so 50% of projects will be partly supported by modular or prefabricated construction within the next few years, and we're seeing huge.
That high, huh?
Absolutely, certainly in the US, in the UK, there's government stimulus that supports that. Similar in Northern Europe as well. There's a lot of movement towards modular construction, off-site construction. And it's strange because it's nothing new. Again, part of the research I wrote, you can find articles that talk about, I don't know, the Romans used to prefabricate structures and bring them over to different parts of the world as the Roman Empire grew and changed. Japan has had modular construction for over 1,000 years. So it's interesting that we're kind of coming back to something that we've tried before, looking at that as a mechanism to drive certain factors. And I'll jump into a bit more detail around modular construction, but thinking also about digital transformation. So again, that's nothing particularly new. The different parts of the solutions that have been around for a number of years, people will be familiar with, but again, I'll show you some slides with some areas that maybe you're not quite so familiar with.
Like you said, right, your design, you started with a paper and pencil.
Absolutely, 100%. So I'll touch on a couple of those over the next 3 years, but you can see, again, the industry is investing heavily in there. 65% of people within the industry are looking at trying to cover a full digital asset lifecycle, using that digital transformation as an opportunity. And I'll touch on a few of those. But also then, as I said, thinking about full asset lifecycle.
Is that because people are trying to get into utilities and telecom for their...
It's thinking about that full asset lifecycle. So you get construction companies that do lots of different things. Right. Maybe if you stick with buildings for the moment, when somebody's constructing a building, their margins may be 1 or 2%, maybe 3% if they're lucky. But if they're able to extend the asset lifecycle into the operation, maybe the commissioning, the operation and the maintenance of that asset, that building, then they can realise profit margins up to 14% and maybe more. So there's a huge amount of money, around trying to manage more and more of that process.
So smart homes, heat pumps in buildings,
that's it.
Utility, right? Yeah.
100%. So I'll go into a little bit of detail into each one of those 3 trends, just to try and give some background. But thinking about design and manufacture off-site, bringing in components on site. I want to say components. I mean, we've got a picture of a frame here, but it could be a complete unit. So there's a hotel that's being built next to the airport I don't live very far from, that looks like just a load of shipping containers piled together. But when you see inside the containers, they're fully fitted out rooms with bathrooms. They don't have the furniture in, but they're literally assembling them on site, a bit like Lego. I think I've got Lego in one of my slides coming up. But the drivers behind modular construction are wide and varied. So shortage of housing, for instance. So I think the Lincoln Institute lands policy back in 2019 found that 90% I think 90% of 200 cities around the world would be unaffordable to live in based on the average house prices and the mean income, which is quite a scary statistic. Also, age-old low productivity. So there's things that can be done with modular in relation to the speed of build. So there's, again, research that's been done that proves that 25% increase in build times can be achieved. Things like waste as well. I mean, traditional construction is 30% waste. I'm sure you've walked past building sites. Sometimes it's sunny in the UK, but more than not, it's not. And they're mucky places, they're hard places to work, and accidents happen. And 30% waste in a traditional construction environment is not unusual. using modular and off-site construction, you're shifting that maybe down to 5%. And there's all sorts of spin-offs you can take from that. So you could think about, supply chain. You don't need to worry about getting as much as you need because you don't have to factor in the waste. You could think about sustainability targets. If you're reducing waste, you're reducing your carbon footprint. So there's research that talks about the growth of modular construction, again, from markets in Asia. So it's not just the US, it's not just the UK. This is something we're seeing, right across, a whole range of different geographies.
No way China can build some of the skyscrapers in a month without doing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I read an article about a Chinese hotel, and I think they built it in 19 weeks, and it was 53 stories. I mean, if it was written down, if somebody said that to me, I would have expected that not to be true, but it certainly was. Other things that are driving off-site and modular construction, just simple supply and demand, which I know is the same in any industry, but hopefully you can see in this chart right up on the top right, so you've got Prod America has actually fallen off the edge of the grid. They've got such a huge demand, and so little supply that, it's a critical issue. And the same with Canada, with the US, Japan, Australia. There's a number of different markets that are really struggling to try and to meet that demand. So it's exciting that's a particular trend. I love seeing that change. As I said, I worked in construction all my life. Modular really wasn't much of a thing many years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. But there are, again, there's research being done. I think it's definitely 90+% of the major house residential developers in the UK have invested either through acquiring a company or investing and partnering with a company in relation to either logistics or a type of modular construction. It may be looking at components, it may be, taking things to a factory to pre-assemble elements of that. And that's the same for utilities, energy and utilities as well. So I'm mindful of time, Vinnie, so I'll rattle on if you don't mind. In terms of the trend too in digital transformation, now, again, I find this fascinating, again, from my perspective, because I started on the drawing board. The concept of BIM, building intelligent modeling, I find fascinating because design teams traditionally used to work in silos. So you'd have architects, you'd have engineers, there could be structural engineers, HVAC, civil engineers. We'd all have our little bits to do on these projects, but you never actually saw a final digital solution until you're out on site and they physically built the thing. Unfortunately, by the time you built something, if there were clashes, if there were problems, if there was miscommunication, that would never be identified. Yeah. So this concept of taking a digital model, a BIM model, that's inputted to by all the different disciplines working on a project, that can then form the basis of a digital twin to the physical representation, then the opportunity is there to be able to see, those clashes, collaboratively work together to identify, how they can be addressed. A couple of other things to mention on here. I went to a lecture recently, and they were talking about drones, and I didn't realize that drones in construction are one of the biggest areas in terms of their usage. And this time they weren't doing surveys, they were actually measuring build progress on a site. So they were looking at the digital model and then taking the information that had been downloaded from the drone once it had been flown over the building, and then overlaying it on the model so you could see what was the programmed expected achievement in terms of build progress, and what had they actually achieved, and where had they achieved it, so they could go to the individual subcontractor and say, hey, that's ahead of schedule or that's behind schedule, what's happening. So it's really interesting.
Some of the most sophisticated roofing companies in the US will do a drone analysis and give you a digital proposal, based on the specs they gather from a drone. Saves them climbing up and getting them tape out to measure.
That's good. It's fascinating. So I won't touch on the other ones on there because I will talk too much, but just one other one maybe. 3D printing. We've seen houses being printed with a full-size house being printed on site. And again, I find that fascinating from a design perspective because you're not talking about right-angle buildings necessarily. You're talking about any profile that the customer cares to define, or the client cares to specify. So it's a fascinating world in terms of digital transformation.
Next time you can come back and do a complete hour on this.
There's a lot you could say about these areas, but as I said, we don't have much time. Maybe just touching on what the effect is on the businesses that actually adopt those technologies. So I've tried to put a slide here that shows very clearly there's more than the 6 digital transformation topics on there. But nevertheless, you can see the early adopters, the leaders, they're creating a huge amount more business than the people who are following on behind them, because they've stolen the march. They've proved to the clients, they know, where the value is, for them, for the client, but also for them themselves, being able to, get more work done, be able to achieve that work in a more, more profitable manner for both sides. So maybe thinking about just the final trend on there, this is the full project asset lifecycle. So that concept of being able to take a model, a digital model, that could maybe used to create a bill of works, a schedule of material that could be fed into the ERP. That can then go into the subcontract supply chain. So you're building packages and sending it out, and then pricing those packages, building out plans. Once you build up the plan, maybe you actually start on site and then you're measuring progress, etc. So I'm not going to read the words on the slides, but that whole idea of managing the full construct process, but then linking it through to the operation and the maintain stage. The value, as I mentioned at the beginning, is far greater on the right-hand side of this diagrammatic representation of the process.
The industrial sector has been obviously caught on a trend called servitization, right? So post-sales services,
indeed,
these models and all that. Is construction, I think construction are lagging on that, right? Or are you seeing more momentum around an asset-centric viewpoint?
There's definitely, there are leaders in that field. We were talking recently that we've got a webinar coming up at IFS working with one of our partner companies who have what they call an industrialized process in relation to building. So it's not offsite manufacturing, it's the industrialization of the process, where they've broken it down into such fine stages that they can measure very, very accurately, how well they're doing. And because of that, and because of the detail that they've got, they can then, commission those assets, maintain those assets. There's all sorts of things that are spinning out of that. And in terms of the full asset life cycle, when you think about the decommissioning of a building, when you take it to pieces, you don't just knock it down. I mean, steel's worth as much secondhand, nearly worth as much secondhand as it is new. Maybe you could recycle bricks. Maybe there's other opportunities to refurbish those buildings and repurpose them, for instance. So yeah, again, it's one of those asset life cycle trends that we're seeing over and over again. So talked about markets, we talked about some of the opportunities. Maybe I'll touch on some of the challenges that construction has got, because some of them have been around, like I said, in prefabrication for a long time.
Yep.
Competition is one. Competition's got to be good because it's going to drive people to succeed. Aging workforce, people don't like working on site. I've got teenage boys, they'd never consider working outside. They're quite happy behind their little laptop sat at home, which is fine. But unfortunately, what the net effect of that over time is you end up with a skills shortage, that missing demands that's having a direct effect on productivity, but also the skills gap as people get older and retire. We don't have the impetus in terms of education and training to backfill those opportunities. As I've already mentioned, construction has very low margins.
On competition, isn't the industry still very fragmented, especially the housing sector? A lot of different builders and so on.
It is, yeah, hugely fragmented. I mean, when you look at I think I've got a slide later on that talks about, who are the people that affect the productivity. Most of the time, it's the specialist contractors. So when you get a specialist contractor, they're obviously, it clues in the name, obviously, that they're good at what they do. But because there's so many of them, and because there's that, as you say, that lack of potential communication or a joined up way of working, it has a direct effect on the productivity, which then can drag down the margins. And if there's only 1 or 2%, you can very quickly find yourself in trouble. We're talking to IFS, a big UK contractor, a national contractor, a very well-known household name. I'd love to talk to you about them, but I'm not allowed yet. But hopefully in a few months' time we will. But the last time they changed their IT solution, or their finance solution, was 17 years ago. So trying to help companies who are already super successful with really old systems and very old-fashioned ways of working, trying to make sure we can build that relationship with them and build that confidence and help them see how doing things differently and better on lots of different levels can really help them achieve even more. So thinking about maybe material shortages, I grabbed this slide earlier on. It comes from the US and census. Everybody's been affected by supply chain recently, and that's still happening now. You look at gas prices, petrol prices across the world, but UK is an area that I know very well, but we're seeing it repeated right across all the different geographies that we're working in. So manufacturing and construction, who two of the core areas that IFS work with, are the areas that are being directly affected by it, and that can then go back to, maybe look at the profit margins where you've got construction there in the bottom quartile. So what I'm trying to paint is just a picture of those different challenges that the construction industry has got. Maybe go back to productivity. Construction productivity, I think I'll put it on the next slide if I just skip on, has changed, what did it say there, 1% in the last 20 years. So those productivity challenges, you imagine the amount of money that's been invested into those businesses to do things better and differently, not just in terms of solutions, but business processes. Technology has a play in that, the way those businesses are being managed strategically. Still, we've got this age-old problem of productivity, and it seems to be a challenge that has multiple different faces. So I tried to paint the picture here. Again, I won't read the words, but you can see, lots of the things I've been talking about are all layered up there together. So let's try and be positive moving that. Hopefully that's not too depressing, Vinnie, but thinking about a typical engineering construction company, whether they do operation and maintenance from a service perspective or construction and engineering, they've got lots and lots of different solutions. It tends to be point solutions. That company I was talking about that we're engaging with at the moment have a digital finance solution, but they have lots of spreadsheets. They've got lots of point solutions. They're all over the place. They gave us a map and it looks probably not dissimilar to this. So thinking about what does a next generation engineering construction company look like? So I have to do this because it's part of our good corporate strategy, and I actually quite like it, is how do we bring all that together? How do we deal with the blood, sweat and tears of a very physical, tough process, especially when you're out on site? You think about those business processes, you think about the decisions, the people, the assets, the suppliers, the subcontract chain. So for us at IFS, we call that our moment of service. How can we actually do something that's different and better for the industry? So our 5 pillars, I'm sure Anthony talked about this, we have one solution. So we don't use lots of different solutions stitched together. We have one core product that can be configured. So I did say there was Lego in there, so you can see it's modular and configurable. We have an industry-specific process as well. So I think it's very important for construction engineering companies to engage with partners, to have people that know the industry and understand it. They're only going to trust us to help them grow and develop if they know that we understand their solutions. The whole product is written on HTML5. It looks really, really good. It's an open and modern architecture that has a number of different ways that we can interface to it. But maybe if I've talked about construction, but maybe if I just talk about a couple of the subsectors just for the last couple of minutes. So we've got main contractors, we've got engineering consultancies. As I said, I used to work for Arabs, but you may have companies that also do service. You may have ones that have lots of yellow things out on site, plants and equipment, but they may also do modular and prefab. So there's an element of manufacturing, there's an element of service, there's an element of professional services and construction. So what we like to make sure that we demonstrate to people that we're talking to is we can help them if they do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe more of those different business streams within their one company. So I just wanted to show you these slides, and we talk about this being purple for a reason. I'm sure you recognize some of the terms, but here you can see we've still got the same solution, but now we're thinking about engineering, procurement, manufacture, construction, and execution. So just a couple more slides, Vinnie, just to again show that maybe primarily for construction and engineering companies, they're driven a lot by client demands. So once they've got their digital backbone, how do they then flex that solution based on what the client says they have to do? Because quite often in construction, they're dictated to. So as I said, we've got that interface layer that enables us to be able to build those connections out and flex them to suit based on the client requirements. Maybe a couple of.
What do you?
Sorry.
People actually, go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
People telling you, look, I want your collaboration. Well, not collaboration.
Yeah, definitely collaboration and common data environment.
And just give me that part of your solution. Are people asking you for components, or are they buying the whole ERP backbone?
So typically the ERP backbone it's modular in its own right. So I often say this to people that we're talking to, especially with really old solutions. You don't have to do everything in purple in one go. You might pick procurement, finance, HR maybe, and the commercial management side of things. But the ability to be able to switch off and on depending on the client needs, outside of that digital backbone, is a key differentiator for us, and it gives that flexibility based on, as I said, what the client's dictating. Maybe just a couple of examples to show that, Vinnie. So Hitachi, a huge organization, 20 different countries. They had loads of different solutions, just like that horrible map I showed before with all the lines going all over the place. So one of their core objectives was to try and get some consolidation, get visibility, get management able to make quickly and timely decisions about what needed to be done, to make sure they were protecting those margins. Similar situation with Multiplex, but they had some very specific contract management requirements that we're able to meet. But again, a lot of the core messages for Multiplex were around transparency, making sure they've got visibility, efficiency for end users. So I won't show you many slides of this, but the interface looks great. It changes to suit different devices. So if you're on a laptop, all well and good, but if you move to a tablet or a smartphone, you've still got all the power of the ERP solution in the smartphone, but because the HTML5 solution snaps and changes to suit the screen, you can continue to work, maybe remotely from the office. So maybe the last slide, Vinnie, if you don't mind, just to try and highlight, those differentiators from our perspective. So you've got traditional ERPs over on the left that might do finance, HR, procurement. You've got construction specific ERPs that concentrate maybe on the site-based stuff, the contract management, whether that's subcontract or billing from clients, the equipment and resources, project cost control. But from an IFS perspective, we can differentiate ourselves because we can cover all of those bases, dependent on the requirement of the opportunity. So I appreciate I've gone through that quite quickly. Vinnie, I was trying to make as much opportunity as possible to get that information across, but I'd welcome any questions that you've got.
And you didn't mention sustainability even once. Wonderful.
The trouble is with sustainability, it's just everybody's saying it, and it just gets a bit.
It shouldn't be. You shouldn't need to bring out sustainability attention to that, right? I mean, it's something that's baked into most solutions these days. So. It
is. I mean, you can look at the, I mentioned about modular, the reduction in waste. That's a key sustainability message. Obviously, you're not wasting material or time. The fact that you can recycle or recommission some of those projects, repurpose them, all of that feeds into the sustainability strategy. And certainly, we've got a sustainability module that we sell.
Yeah, the circular economy. Yep.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris.
Not at all. Thank you. It's great to get the opportunity. As I said, sorry if I was going fast, but I get excited.
I asked a lot of questions. Not your fault. Thank you.